Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Holland, and this is my best friend Tori.
Hi.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. Don't worry, we break down everything as we go. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. Just be sure to tread lightly, there will be hot takes and spoilers. And cut to the intro. Alrighty, so today, we kind of mutually chose this, I guess, but we are reviewing the video game Undertale. This is familiar to both of us. Tori and I both actually played it together. I played it independently, and then I was with Tori when she played it blind. The game is very interesting. The tagline for the game in Undertale's release trailer was "the friendly RPG where nobody has to die." Here's some information about the game. It's a role-playing game developed independently by Toby Fox with additional art by Timmy Chang in the Game Maker Studio engine. It was released for Microsoft Windows and Mac OS X on September 15th, 2015, for Linux on July 17th, 2016, for PS4 and PlayStation Vita on August 15th, 2017, for Nintendo Switch in September of 2018, and for Xbox One and Xbox Series in March of 2021. Some interesting things about the development. The earliest known screenshots of Undertale were posted as a joke, or in a joke thread on the PK hack section of Starman.net, where Toby Fox jokingly claimed that the game would be an Earthbound ROM hack called Underbound 2. The first known demo was sent to video game and merchandise website Fangamer to play back on May 2nd, 2013. It was met with positive reviews, so a public demo was later released on May 23rd, 2013, and then it was later funded through a Kickstarter campaign with a goal of $5,000 and ended up receiving $51,000 from 2,398 people. Due to the short length of the demo, Fox expected the game to be completed as early as August 2014. So it was a little later than that. It was in 2015. So the general synopsis of the game, and this is mostly taken from the game's actual intro, is that long ago, two races ruled over the earth, humans and monsters. One day, a war broke out between the two races. After a long battle, the humans were victorious. 7 of their greatest magicians confined the monsters to the underground with a magic barrier. However, this barrier is not perfect. Many years after the war, in 2000 and X, well, it's 201X. So, a human child climbs Mount Ebott for their own mysterious reason. It is said that those who climb the mountain never return. The child discovers an enormous hole in the mountain and falls in. After that, the story begins. So that's just a brief little spoiler-free synopsis. If you haven't played the game and don't want any more spoilers,
click off now.
Click off now. I am going to read, you can go to Undertale.com on their About page, and they give you a little more information that may be considered a spoiler if you haven't played the game. So from here on out, there will be spoilers, so you've been warned. But the About page of Undertale.com says, in this RPG, you don't have to kill anyone. Each enemy can be defeated non-violently. Dance with a slime, pet a dog, whisper your favorite secret to a knight, or ignore this choice and rain destruction upon your foes. But your journey will take determination. Each adversary has a unique bullet patterns that you must dodge as well. Emphasis on humor, character dialogue, and player choice. The average playtime is about 6 hours. So that's from Undertale's About page at Undertale.com. So, why don't you kick it off with our first category, Tori?
Okay, so the first category for video games is characters, story, and world. We kind of combine these 3 elements together. Out of a possible 2 points, I gave this 2 points. I think that the characters and the story and the world is really where this game shines the brightest, and where I think most of the memorable facets of this game come into play. There is immediate story building with the intro. It's sort of a cinematic cutscene intro. You can get a very good idea or taste of the art style kind of from the beginning. You are given backstory a little bit. It kind of touches on like the summary that you just read. So it touches on that, sort of the backstory of the world. And then you see your character fall. And then right after the fall, the first character that you meet is this talking flower. And immediately you're like, okay, seems friendly enough, cute little flower. And then Flowey causes distrust from the beginning because perspective that you have of Flowey as a character is very easily or very quickly revealed to be not true, and that Flowey is in fact an enemy toward you. And I think that as a beginning of the game sort of sets the stage, at least in my perspective, it did as a player. It sort of sets the stage of who can I trust in this world and who can't I trust in this world. And it made me play the whole thing more carefully because I felt like if this is our first introduction to the world, then things are not as they appear and I should treat them as such. So because of that, I feel like it sort of, I wouldn't say filtered the world in my perspective, but I think it just gave you a very clear understanding that this underworld or Undertale or whatever you want to call it, you know, the under the surface world that you've fallen into is very different than the world back home. And obviously you play as a young character. The implication is that you are a child. I've heard some people say that you're like a preteen or teenager. I'm not really sure, but the fact is that it's established that you're a very young character. And I think we could all say that in childhood, we have a level of naivety to us where it's easier for us to trust people or trust the good in things because at the beginning, we aren't given any reason not to do that. And I think, however, as we get older and we learn more of the world around us, we sort of become more guarded. And so you have that guard put up very early in the game. And I think it's kind of an effective way to establish like where you are, especially because you don't know how to get back yet. And so your entire goal of this game is to just get back home. And you have no idea how to do that because you have no idea where you are or how this world functions or if the people in it are going to help you or not. I think because of Flowey's intro, it makes Toriel's intro feel really ominous as well because Toriel's the second character that you meet. And now you have no idea if you can trust her or not. She's leading you through these ruins. There's all these puzzles and different things. She says things that are kind of weird to you at times and slightly off-putting, and you get these strange vibes like, is she being affectionate for any sort of, what am I trying to say?
Like an ulterior motive.
Yeah. Does she have any ulterior motive for being sort of kind and affectionate to you, especially because some of the things that she says doesn't seem to kind of line up with her actions? Or she'll ask you to go do something without her, which seems very odd. So that distrust sort of lingers through that whole meeting with Toriel. And then you are brought to Toriel's home. I'm not going to go through the whole plot just to clarify, but Toriel brings you to her home. And then in that home, she forbids you from leaving. So now this distrust continues to build and build and build until you make the decision that you are going to break free from this house and do so through battle with Toriel. And I'll get into battle mechanics when we talk about that later. But I think it's very strange because usually in video games, you have like your tutorial period. And it's always really easy, low stakes stuff where you like see the town you grew up in and your neighbors and you learn how to jump and things. And like, there's none of that because in the overworld, you literally just walk around and press A to interact with things. And as far as battles go, you kind of just have to learn as you go with that sort of thing. There's no real tutorial period. So you have to base your exposure or understanding of the world that you're in based on the characters around you, and everything leading up to the point of I have to leave Toriel's house feels awful and scary and lonely. And I think it's a really effective tool because it makes you feel like you have to keep going. It's a good momentum that's not usual for games. Usually momentum in games, I feel like, comes much later. But I think the momentum is heaviest at the beginning of Undertale. The characters, however, though, we have such a diverse cast of characters, and they are all really weird, but they fit the world so naturally. And despite being so weird and odd and like caricatures of different like emotions or stereotypes, it leads to a level of comedy, but I also feel like nobody is so comedic that they don't also serve a purpose somewhere in the world or in the story. So there's a level of genuineness to each character, despite the fact that they're super wacky, that I find really appealing. And there's really very few characters that I dislike. Most of the characters you meet along the way that stick with you, I mean, there are like NPC characters, you know, or characters that we may learn their name, but they don't really have much bearing on the story. But I'm talking about sort of like our main cast here that has some sort of weight or bearing, or, you know, has a plot point that intersects with yours, that sort of thing. Characters like Napstablook, we meet him very early in the ruins. And we kind of get this idea that he's just like this super depressed sort of emo ghost, but like he's still really endearing in a way, because you show, as a character, you can show kindness to him, and that makes all the difference. Toriel's a crazy, interesting character. Then you have Sans and Papyrus, very different from each other as brothers, incredibly memorable. Both of them super funny in their own individual ways. They both have different roles sort of in your story as the character and your interaction with them. Sans kind of is more of like the actually helpful but really quiet sort of guy, and then Papyrus is sort of the loud, he has this big ego, and he has this aura of like, I'm going to help you with this, and actually doesn't help you at all, but like it's in a really funny way. So those characters are really memorable. You have characters like Undyne, who's just like this kick butt warrior girl. You have Metaton and Metaton's creator Alphys, who are just like, and Alphys is like the stereotypical nerd who like is really into like weeb culture, and Metaton is this sentient computer who is in love with himself, basically. Temmie, what do you even say about Temmie? Temmie is the weirdest character. However, the character that I probably reference the most is Temmie. Super memorable, strange humor, fun design. Temmie Village is a trip, and the music sounds like Rugrats theme song. It just does, okay? And then at the end, you also learn a lot more about the characters of Asgore and Asriel. I think that overall, what makes this game the most memorable is its characters, and how those characters push forward the story in their own way and their own right. And also how they help you as a player learn through the revelation of things that they know of their world. You get the big picture sort of slowly pieced together as you approach the end. I want to talk about this more in mechanics, but it does have some things to do with the story, so I am going to touch on it now. But how you play this game affects how the story develops and how it's revealed to you. So it's really important to note that how you choose to play the game from the beginning will determine what information you learn about the world and how that translates into the character interactions and relationships that you build and develop in the ending of the game and the resolution of how you get home, and a few other things too. So it's a very interesting way to write your story in that way, and this is not entirely a new thing, that where like player choices change the outcome of a game. That's not entirely new, but I think the way that since the story is already so strongly rooted into just the atmosphere of the world and the characters that inhabit it, it's worth noting that it is a good idea to be intentional and careful with how you play the game, because if you're wanting to get more information from this character, you probably should not defeat them in battle. It would benefit you more to befriend them instead. So I say things like that because I'm glad that I chose, when I played this game, it was suggested to me by Holland and Graham Graham is Holland's brother. It was suggested to me that I play this game in a pacifist way. I didn't really know what that meant in the beginning, and as I was rewatching our playthrough of it to prep for this, there were a few times where I expressed my frustration in choosing the pacifist run, because I kept saying things like, in battle it made me weaker. And again, I'll touch more about that in mechanics. But I'm glad that I did, because by the end of the game, if you play it in such a pacifist way, you do have these really genuine, heartfelt relationships and friendships and connection with all of these characters that you've come to know through the course of the story, and how they perceive you and how they perceive humans because of you changes drastically. And I'm very glad for that. I tried to watch a genocide run, which is the opposite of how I played, where you just kill everything in sight. And I couldn't finish it because it hurt my feelings too much, which I know is silly to say, but after I have already played it as a pacifist and I become attached to the characters of this world, going back and watching the character just like defeat them all was heartbreaking to me. So I feel like if I could go back and do Undertale again, like erase my memory of it, I would want to do a genocide run first maybe, and then go back and do a pacifist run, because then I feel like it would be fine. I wouldn't have the same attachment. But trying to watch a genocide run after I did a pacifist run is heart-wrenching, simply because the story is ingrained so differently in your brain from that kind of play style. Lots can be missed in this game. So if you like story in video games, I suggest you to be very thorough in your exploration of the maps and areas. Read every sign, read every poster, read every book that you find, because those little details add a lot to the story of the world and the context of where you may be or who you may be in the space of. All of those things add, and it all can be very easily missed. I also think that the pacing is really well done, considering that you go in completely dumb about anything going on, very naive to the world around you, and the revelation of what's going on and how it came to be the way it is slowly revealed to you in tiny little bits by all sorts of characters, NPC and not. And by the time you get to the end of the game, if you have been thoroughly talking to people and exploring, you're going to have a very vast sense of the world and the people around you. I know some people don't like to play that way, and that's okay. But if you do appreciate a well-woven story, then I would suggest you to be very thorough. I don't really have much else to say. The characters are just so lovely, and the story really is delivered really well, especially the end. I think that the reveal of Asgore and his role at the end is really important and pivotal, and holds a lot of weight because of everything that you've learned. The stakes feel really high, especially because you're given almost a false impression of your usefulness to and for Asgore, I suppose. So you almost feel a slight sense of betrayal again at the end, and you have that choice to make yet again. Do I fight, or do I try to befriend and understand? So I think that that whole revelation, the revelation of Azrael and Asgore and Toriel's relationship and how that's been broken, and this question of can it ever be restored, and who was Azrael and why does he hold such weight in the story, and decision making of both Toriel and Asgore. These are all questions, and I know that we give a spoiler alert, but I still don't want to talk about them in such depth that you feel like you don't have to play the game anymore, because I think there are certain things in the story that, like, getting that information for the first time as a player resonates really deeply, and it's still something that I really remember from my playthrough. So I don't want to, even though it's okay to give spoilers here, I don't want to give all of them. So I just have to say that the reveal of the ending, and then if you play as pacifist, being able to reload your game and then do the true pacifist ending after the world has sort of come to rights again, for lack of a better term, and then getting even more further information about the world and the characters around you and the history of characters like Azrael, is worth it. Definitely worth the extra time that you can take. So all of that to say, 2 out of 2 points for character, story, and world.
All right, so I gave this category 1.5 points out of 2. I agree with a lot of the stuff that you said. I think overall, the game of Undertale is a very experiential game. It's all about how you as the player are experiencing the game. It's not so much it's very linear. The story is very linear. The areas you go to are extremely linear, but it's more about how you're experiencing the game as a player and how your immediate choices will then have a downstream effect on the rest of the game. And you can't, that's the majority of the story. It just unfolds as you go. It doesn't give you a lot of information up front. And I think that's fine. That's a good, different, unique approach to kind of the video game genre, especially for one that's not a open world sandbox style game. So it's modeled in this kind of 8-bit old school structure, and yet the game is all about your kind of freedom to build the story however you want as you go. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think there's anything necessarily negative about that approach to a video game. However, it does come with some problems in just of the very nature of that being the way the story progresses. So the biggest issue that I have with the story is that unless you know going in ahead of time that the object of the game is that nobody has to die, you cannot experience the full story. Like, you just can't. If you kill one enemy, it will completely change the outcome of the game versus if you never killed a single enemy. So I think that games that you can just pick up off the shelf and play blind, if the story is that hinged on literally if one enemy dies, it changes the entire outcome of the story for a 6-hour game, I think that it would be helpful to have that knowledge up front, because then you could choose if you want to play the game to experience the full story, or if you don't care, you just want to play the game and experience it however the chips fall, that's how the chips fall. And I understand that, like, with internet culture, it's kind of like you'd have to live under a rock to not know that about Undertale, but that's not really true. Like, there are a lot of people that are going to just pick up the game, I've heard it's good, and start going. That's literally how I played the game. And so I got to the end of the game, and I had killed maybe like half a dozen enemies, and got to the end of the game and realized, like, I had done the wrong thing the whole game. And now I can't go back and change the ending without starting the whole game over. And actually, this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler here, but if you play a game and you kill one enemy, just one, and you get to the end, it's going to have, outcome A at the end, and then you have a choice whether you can decide whether or not you want to kill Flowey. If you decide to kill Flowey, you have to erase your entire file and start all the way over if you ever want to get the pacifist or the true pacifist run.
Really?
Because this is a big spoiler, because Flowey is Azrael.
Right.
If you kill him, he can't reappear at the end when you replay the game. It eliminates Flowey from the game. Period. When you restart the game,
if you start a new
he's not
save
there.
file, he doesn't
He's gone.
greet you in the beginning?
He's gone.
No way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
So it's a great concept for a game. Like, it's great. It's incredibly creative. I give it full props for creativity in that aspect. But for a player that's like, oh crap, I didn't know that was the goal of the game, was to play as a pacifist the whole time. Oh, I'll just start a new game and try that. You can't. You have to start all the way over. Like, erase your save file and start over. And that was me. That's what happened. When I got to the end, I was like, well, they really make it seem like they want me to kill Flowey, so I did. And now I have to pretty much erase the save data and start all the way over. So I think that's slightly problematic for people that went in blind, played it blind, didn't know anything about the game or the real crux of the game, which is that nobody has to die. And now that's altered their ability to replay the game in a pacifist run. And so that's why I couldn't give it full points for story. But positives, the characters are fantastic. You touched on a lot of those. I love how unique they are. They all have their own personalities. They all fit the world. I think it's very difficult to create characters that are all very eclectic and then make them all feel cohesive with each other. Yeah. And Undertale does a great job with that. I do think that the tutorial aspect of the game is really long. I think I clocked it. It took you over an hour just to get through the tutorial part of the game when you play it blind.
Now, granted, I am a slow player, so an hour for a tutorial for me might be 30 minutes for you. So take that with a grain of salt. But it is kind of a long intro.
Yeah. There is a good number of dialogue. Like you said, the dialogue is very thorough. The signs on the wall are very thorough. But there are also a lot of those parts that really don't matter to the game. Like, for example, there's a part where there's an artifact and you pick the artifact up, or you go to touch it and a dog comes in and takes it, and then you get dog residue in your bag, and it messes up everything in your bag, and that literally has nothing to do with the game. It's kind of a goofy Easter egg, I think, or at least my understanding of it is I think it's a goofy Easter egg that Toby Fox wanted to put his annoying dog in the game, so he did, and that was literally just like an Easter egg that the creator made to have fun. But something like that you think has significance, like, oh, should I save this? Like, what should I do? And it literally has no outcome. Doesn't affect the game at all. One thing of the game that's really thorough, and I did not, I didn't test this theory, but so you can go and do some internet sleuthing if you want to, but I believe when you can call the phone and Papyrus and Undyne talk to you on the phone, they have a different dialogue for every room that you go in. So every screen change on the game, if you call them, they say something different.
That's crazy.
That's insane. Like, that is so much.
Toby Fox really dedicated a lot of time to just that, even.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of attention to detail just to help build in this story and this world. So I think overall it's a good story. It has some pretty high stakes. I mean, it's you versus these monsters. These monsters are clearly out to kill you. Like, they never do anything to show you that they're pacifists. They're just trying to kill you and give you a game over. And yet, the way that you approach the game to really experience the full story is the exact opposite of what's conventional for video games. And I think that just makes for a really interesting story and a really interesting playthrough. And if you do the pacifist run on your first time and you want to go back and try different runs, and, you know, like you said, you may be like Tori and it may hurt your feelings a little bit, but it's really is the best way to approach the game, because then you get the whole story and you really get to see how the impact of your choices have changed because you made different decisions along the way. Oh, one other critique I have as far as story goes, I guess you could technically put this in mechanics, but I do think at the end of the game, when Flowey is really evil and it's like the final boss fight with Flowey against Flowey, I think it's a little too meta. It's kind of like the whole thing, you're immersed in this underground world, it's you and monsters and all this stuff, and then the end game, Flowey's mentioning your save file and how you can't save the game, your save file's corrupted and things like that. I just think that story-wise, it kind of pulls you out of the world a little bit. I think it's creative and surprising that it's like, oh man, all these players are going to think that their data's corrupted. Haha, but it's not. It's like, Flowey's so evil, he actually acknowledges that it's a game. But it's like, I think the whole point of immersing yourself into the story is that it's not a video game. Like, it's this story in this world with these people, and you're trying to be immersed into this world. And I think for that to be a final boss, on the one hand, it's creative. I'm not saying that Toby Fox made a poor decision, but I think as far as the whole story is concerned, it kind of pulls you out of that world for a bit, and you're like, oh, the main villain of this game knows that this is a game. Okay, so did the stakes just go away? Like, what happened? So I think that aspect of the game was just another little negative I had. Again, I'm not going to say Toby Fox made a mistake, because he can do whatever he wants. It's his creation.
Yeah.
But I think from a story aspect, it is a bit of a negative point there. So that's, for those main reasons, I gave this 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay. So the second category for video games is mechanics. So out of 2 points, I gave this 1 point. I do love, and we talked about this in depth. I love that the story and ending and character relationships changed based on your battle style. However, in this way, mechanically, battles are really tricky to understand in the beginning of this game. And I wish that you were given a little bit more of a direction, and in a way we're able to understand your choices from the beginning of the game in regards to battling.
It's kind of like, you know how video games way back in the day, it came with an instruction booklet, and you literally had to read it, or you would not know how to play the game. There was no in-game tutorial. It was, right, you read the instruction booklet that gave you all the controls before you played the game. I feel like that would be extremely appropriate with a game like Undertale.
Yeah, I agree. But because of that, because it's so vague, it can lead to a lot of frustration in regards to battles in this game. And really, my biggest complaint with this game is how frustrating, long, and unforgiving a majority of important battles are in this game. And I understand. Boss battles shouldn't be quick. If they're quick, you're overpowered. So I understand the concept. However, when I've been working 45 minutes plus on having a conversation with Papyrus so that he will not throw me into his poorly designed jail in his home, like, there comes a point where I'm like, this isn't even fun or funny anymore. It just feels like a chore. And it happens a lot. I also want to talk about how vague some certain aspects of the game become, and I understand that you don't want to give too much information to your player, because then you do want your player to have some accountability in paying attention to their surroundings and the story. But sometimes I think it is worth taking an extra line or two of dialogue to give the importance of a certain item or action to your player in regards to the future. Let me give you a great example. The spider donut. Thank you, Holland, for telling me to keep the spider donut. Because when you get to the Muffet fight, it is insanely easier when you have that spider donut. Because then she's like, oh, you're actually like a friend. Cool. Thank you for supporting the business. I'm not going to make you battle me for 2 hours. I watched a friend of mine on Twitch stream Undertale blind. She asked for no spoilers. We gave her no spoilers. She ate the spider donut very early. And by the time she got to Muffet, it took her 4 streams of 2+ hours each just to get past Muffet. And that was just her brute forcing it over and over and over and over until she finally got lucky enough to win.
Yeah.
And by the time she was done with Muffet, she was like, I don't even know if I want to keep going with the game. And while some of you might be thinking, well, you should pay attention and keep the spider donut, there is very little in the game itself to tell you that spider donut should not be eaten.
Or that you could even use it
right
at that part of the game.
Exactly.
I did the same thing. I ate the spider donut early because I was like, oh, it heals you. And I almost quit the game at that point.
And it's things like, well, okay, I bought a spider donut from the spider bake sale, but I also bought a whole bunch of nice creams from the ice cream guy. So now I'm like panicking. Should I keep an ice cream in my box for the rest of the game? Is that going to come into play somewhere down the road and I'm going to be stuck if I don't have it? So then it almost becomes a little bit like you have this anxious sort of obsession over what items do you need to have at all times and what items do I need to make it a point to get. And then you realize there's nothing really in the game to tell you those things. Those are just things you have to play the game to experience, and then you can give that advice to other players. But let's say that you play games and you don't really have any friends around you that are gamers or that like the same games that you do or have played Undertale. And so you're playing Undertale for the first time. You have no resources, no friend to give you that advice. And you're here for 8 hours beating your head against the desk because Muffet is destroying you. So in that aspect, I'm glad that you told me, because I'm the kind of player that does not have that kind of patience. I just don't. As far as video games go, the less combat, the better in my book, and that's just how I've always been. So if you're telling me I'm going to have to spend 8 hours on a boss battle because I didn't have an item, I'm just going to quit the game. As it doesn't really matter how great I think the characters or story are. In that moment, I don't want to do this anymore. That's where rage quits come from in my book. So just know that going in, that if you're going to play this game, that there are going to be moments where you're going to be sitting for a very long time, especially if you're playing a pacifist run, where you're just trying all the options over and 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 over until you can finally spare that character. And a lot of times it's not even like your tactics are changing. It's that you're waiting for all the dialogue that has to happen with each turn. And once they finally get through the dialogue, then you can spare them. It's not like you actually did anything to get there. You just have to wait it out. And in some ways, that's really frustrating. So that's most of my critiques. Also, I'm sorry, this is also another critique. There are a lot of puzzles in this game, and I love puzzles. Anybody who has heard me talk about video games for a long amount of time will know that I love puzzles in a game. So a lot of the puzzles are in the overworld, and that's great. However, some of those directional puzzles are really clumsy. Things like, where you have to like kick the snowball into the golf hole, super clumsy. It's very difficult, I think. Things like when you're down in Hotland and you have all of those like conveyor belt puzzles and like the little launch pad puzzles with the spinning directions, and you have to hit the switches to change that stuff is sometimes clumsy. It's fun puzzles, but just physically making your character do the movements sometimes is just really clunky. And so you're like, okay, I know how to solve this, but now I can't make my person do what I want them to do. And so there's a little bit of frustration in those moments as well. I do think that, and this is I struggled a lot to place this in either mechanics or personal preference, because a lot of this does have to do with my personal preference and how I like video games to be. But because I think the game was designed to be this way, and it does so well, is where I'm putting it in mechanics. And that is that I think this game is a great linear exploration game. It's designed to be linear. Okay, great. I like linear, so I'm already a little bit biased toward that, I will admit. However, I think that the exploration of the world is very nice because you can choose how thorough you want to be without getting lost at any point. Or like in an open world game, you're like, I'm just trying to find the next plot point, and then here you are doing 6 side quests that you didn't want to do because you got lost on your way to the main plot point, or vice versa. You're like, I want to do some side quests before I move on, and then next thing you know, it's the next boss battle, and you're like, whoa, how'd I get here? I was just trying to deliver the cookies to Granny's house, or whatever the side quest is, I'm just making up something. In Undertale, that's not ever necessarily the case, because since you can kind of choose how thorough your exploration is, you can just continue on through the map and be like, oh, nope, this isn't where I'm supposed to go, turn around and go. Or you can be like, well, I wonder what this is. I wonder what this person has to say, you know, blah, blah, blah. Because of that, I think it gives the player a nice sense of control without ever feeling like, oh, this is a waste of my time, or, oh, I didn't know this was here, because there's just a nice balance between sort of like hidden and in your face. I also like that there are lots of things that you can go back to in the world that weren't necessarily available or ready for you the first time you pass through, but because the world is so linear, it's, even though it may take you a few minutes, it's not like you're going to get lost trekking all the way back to Snowdin or something like that, because you already know exactly how to get there. It's basically a straight shot. I also appreciate that they included like a ferry service once you kind of get toward that halfway, 2/3 mark of the game, because there are some times where I'm like, you know what? You know, these items were really cheap, and they gave me 15 HP, you know, but they were four sections ago, and like, I really don't want to trek back. Oh, great. Well, now there's a ferry service. So even though you're all the way in Hotland or whatever, you can go back to Snowdin within a couple seconds by using this ferry or whatever have you. So I do appreciate that they sort of give you that option, sort of that quick travel option. I do want to talk about the final battle for a second. I don't disagree with what you said about the story point, the final battle kind of, you know, I don't disagree with that. However, my problem with the final battle is that it is so chaotic. There is almost no way to strategize. There's no actual thinking or strategy to that final battle. It is literally move around and hope for the best. And while some of that does come into play in previous battles, with other characters that you've boss battled, if you lose the first couple times, you go back in and you kind of know, okay, these are going to be sort of like the patterns to expect. If I do this, then this attack comes to me. If they say this, then I can expect this sort of thing. So you can learn the characters fairly well. I don't know if the point was that Flowey is unhinged and unpredictable or what, but there is so many moving parts, sounds, just chaos. I don't know how else to describe it, but that final battle is just so chaotic. I could not find any real way to strategize. It's literally just wait it out and hope for the best. And maybe I'm just not the kind of gamer that understood the strategy to it. Maybe somebody who's better at games in general could tell me, oh, well, the strategy for the Flowey fight is that you have to do this and then this and blah, blah, blah. But like, from my personal experience, it felt like there was nothing I could do but just hold on to the roller coaster lap bar in front of me and pray that I make it out alive. So in that way, it sort of frustrated me. I feel like a lot of my notes for mechanics are a bit negative, but I still didn't want to like take away all the points, because I think that the replayability is really great. I think that sort of, I wouldn't say like NPC battles, but I guess NPC battles, like the random battles, they have a nice difficulty level curve. I think that in-game Easter eggs and things were really nice. Sort of the fact that it's now available on so many consoles, I think, is like a really big positive as well. The combat system is really interesting, where you can choose whether to fight or to act instead. I think all of those things are positives. I just don't have as much to say about them as I do the negatives. So all of that to say, 1 out of 2 points for mechanics.
All right. I also gave this 1 out of 2 points for mechanics. I agree with a lot of the points you made, so I won't rehash all of those. I think that overall, the controls are very simple. There's minimal buttons, minimal options. You don't have to worry about... I played this on the Nintendo Switch, so you didn't have to worry about using, you know, your L and R triggers or your left analog stick, things like that. Or your D-pad. You don't have to worry about using a lot of stuff in the combat or different combat techniques and things like that. It's just really simple. You just pick the buttons you want to pick and then, dodge the bad guys' attacks. But that being said, the combat of the game can be extremely repetitive. If you're not playing a pacifist run and you're using the combat part, you hit fight, it's literally the same for every single enemy. You try and aim the little bar in the middle and get more damage that way. It's extremely repetitive. Again, if you are doing a pacifist run and you're trying to figure out how to spare, the monsters and come up with the right response to whatever it is their little dialogue box is saying, that can also be extremely repetitive. If you meet the similar enemies multiple times, it's the same thing for all of them. It doesn't ever change. It's not super interactive. If you come across a Frogget, the way to spare him is the same every time. So it's kind of nice once you figure out how to spare the Frogget, then it's the same way every time. But at the same time, it's also like, okay, I literally just clicked the same thing. It's almost, there's no point in me even interacting with one, except now I have to go through all these steps again. So that's kind of one reason that it's kind of a pro and a con. So that's why one of the reasons that I gave this kind of half credit for mechanics. One thing I also did consider with mechanics, we can talk about replayability and different play options. So the different storylines that you can follow, I did take that into account with mechanics, even though that does kind of fall under story as well. I think some of the overworld puzzles are really entertaining, like Papyrus's puzzles that he gives you are all super goofy and kind of unexpected when you're playing through them. But I think at the same time, they're done very well. Like you said at the beginning of this episode, you're taught from the very beginning, like, nothing is as it seems. And so then with Papyrus, his puzzles seem really dumb and simple, and then it turns out that they are. It's kind of enjoyable. It's almost a relief that it's something so silly and simple that it kind of gives you a little bit of levity in the game. Mettaton's quiz, I think, is a great puzzle to do when Alphys is giving you the answers.
I meant to talk about that, but yeah, I think a lot of Mettaton scenes are really fun, and even though Mettaton can be annoying as a character sometimes, I think the humor, it's almost like he's clothed in this idea of satire and parody, so you accept the annoyance a little bit better, and so things like his quiz become more fun because you're like, this is obviously not serious.
Right. And I think that another reason that Mettaton's quiz, for example, is so enjoyable is because it's one of the few moments in the game, kind of like you mentioned, where you can just figure it out as you're going. And I think that's one area where the mechanics of this game, they are extremely simple, but there's not a lot of information. Like you kind of talked about, with the Spider Donut and Muffet. That combat with that boss battle is so difficult compared to some of the other bosses. And some people are they're pro. They played these kind of 8-bit style games all the time, and it wasn't difficult for them, and that's great, but not everybody is used to that kind of combat style and the length that it can take to beat boss battles. Even things that, like the fact that when you're up against Undyne, you're supposed to flee and keep running. That's never told to you in the game. There's nothing that clues you off that if you just keep running.
I think I remember during my playthrough being why the heck would I do that?
Right.
Because I think somebody suggested why don't you just run away? And I was like, why would I do that? I'm just gonna have to start over at the beginning.
Right.
Because it does seem counterintuitive to how you know games to be.
Right. And then in when you're fighting Asgore at the end, you're trying to talk to him, and it's your talking does nothing. And then depending on how you want to play, you get him down to, you're supposed to fight him. Even if you're playing a pacifist run, you're supposed to fight him and get him down to 1 health, and then you can talk to him. There's no way that you would know that's what you have to do. So for things like that, there's aspects of the game where if you're not looking up hints online or you have somebody with you that can kind of give you hints, the game can be very complex, especially if you're going for a specific outcome or you're wanting to experience the full story. Sometimes the mechanics of this game work against you. So for that, I gave it 1 out of 2 because I think that the mechanics of a video game should complement your story unless it's the kind of game where the mechanics are the focus of the game. And I think anybody that plays Undertale can agree the mechanics of this game are not anything super revolutionary. It's not like you've developed this crazy, super great graphics VR experience, but the game is still trying to be very experiential, which is great. I think it's a great thing, but the mechanics tend to work against you in that respect. So for that, I give it half credit, so 1 out of 2.
Okay. The next category is aesthetics. Out of 2 points, I gave this 1.5 points. I think that there are some really, really cool things that this game delivers in the realm of aesthetics. The first thing I want to talk about is something I would have never known existed, again, thanks to Holland and her brother Graham, because at least in the Switch version, I don't know if any of the other console versions do this, but at least in the Switch version, when you are about to start the game, you can go into the settings and choose a border, and there's something called a dynamic border. And it was so cool. So basically, it puts a little border around the play area of the screen, and every time you go into a new area, the artwork of that dynamic border would change. And that's just such a cute little tiny detail that maybe a lot of you just don't know exists. And if you go back and play on a console that would give you that option, I would suggest doing it, because you start out in the ruins, so you have the very purple brick aesthetic sort of surrounding you. It kind of just increases the immersion, I guess. And then when you step out of the ruins into the snow, as you approach Snowdin, everything changes to the snowy wood. And I just thought that it was just a really pretty, simple way to just make me feel that much more immersed in the world. So that was just a really cool thing. It's obvious that the style was very inspired by Earthbound. Since we know that Earthbound was a huge inspiration for Toby Fox in making this game, you can definitely tell with just how the game looks, how the characters move in the overworld, how the battle screens look, the art style of each character, that sort of thing. It does feel very Earthbound. So if you are an Earthbound fan or a fan of the Mother series, then you would probably enjoy at least the art style of Undertale and Deltarune, which is the other project that Toby Fox is working on. The music. The music is divine. I love the music of Undertale. So many of the tracks have the same sort of recurring, I don't know if it's considered a mnemonic. I don't want to use words incorrectly. But similar motifs are repeated a lot in different tracks in the soundtrack. I do find myself listening to Undertale music quite a bit, even when I'm not playing the games. The hotel theme, Snowdin theme, Megalovania, the Napstablook battle, the Papyrus battle, these are all personal tracks, picks from me as far as tracks go. They're just so good. I also think this game does a really good job at using backgrounds and perspective. There is a scene, or I guess it's just a walk, an area, where you see the castle in the far back, and there's stars all over, and it's nighttime, and you're walking on a path that's way closer to the front, and the perspective use is so nice, and as you walk across the screen, you're simply in shadow. You're simply a silhouette. And it's just a really nice use of the perspective, kind of giving you the impression that that place is obviously really big because look how far back it is, and yet it still seems so massive. And then just the use of the light in a situation like that. If you're supposed to be outside and these are all stars, then it makes sense that you would just be in shadow and your character wouldn't actually be visible in a detailed way. things like that are so nice. They also use like up and down perspectives a bit too. There's a couple areas where you can fall down to a lower level and then work your way back up. So in those cases, I think that's used well as well. There is very distinct coloration that's used in different areas of the game. So I think that's good as well. I don't have a ton to say about aesthetics. I think it's overall very good. However, I didn't give it full points because of two small things. One, your player character is very bland. I wish that we had been given good opportunities with either cutscenes or even just expressions on our sprite, because it's very hard to know that it's very hard from a player perspective to feel like you are the player character, which is commonly referred to as Frisk. So I'll call them Frisk. But Frisk gives you no expression. So sometimes I'm like, no reaction whatsoever, no emotion. And I understand it's probably supposed to be slightly vague because, if you as a player are feeling differently than Frisk may be reacting, then, I don't know if that would change the immersion or whatever. But for me personally, I would have preferred a little bit of emotion or at least reactionary moments from Frisk, because otherwise you as a player character are just too blank a canvas, too blank a palette. And it makes me feel like I have no personality in this world. That like all the personality in the world is from the characters around me and I add nothing to it except being nice. But that's only if you do a pacifist run, and it's only because people tell you you're nice, not because you actually see like compassion on your character's face or something like that. So it's just something that I wish was there and is not. And because of that, I feel like it leaves a little bit to be desired in regards to aesthetics. The only other small thing I have to say is they do use like small face sprites in the text boxes. And I think that's generally a good thing. However, I found that sometimes I felt like the expression didn't match the dialogue that was being said by the character. So to me, it was just confusing sometimes. It felt like it just didn't match. So I don't know if that was really more of an aesthetics issue or maybe perhaps just like a mechanics issue. Maybe they just didn't have enough expressions to match. So they just had to go with what they had. But yeah, sometimes it felt like the expressions of the face in the text box didn't match the dialogue being spoken. But 1.5 points out of 2.
I also gave this 1.5 points out of 2 for aesthetics. And I kind of went back and forth on this because I think that you could kind of look at it two ways. You could look at it as overall the aesthetics of this video game compared to all the other aesthetics of every other video game would merit, that comparison. Or in the context of an 8-bit style game, how do these aesthetics hold up? So I kind of went back and forth because it's like the graphics of Undertale compared to something like the graphics of, Breath of the Wild. And Breath of the Wild is not by any means the most beautiful game ever. Even there are games that are aesthetically way more beautiful than Breath of the Wild. But let's just use that as a comparison. There's no comparison. So it's tough to kind of say like, oh, Undertale's graphics are crappy. Well, that's not the intent. The purpose of it is to be an 8-bit style game. So that's the lens that I looked at this through, because I don't think it's fair to really compare apples to oranges that way. That being said, I think that there's a lot of positives to this style and to the design and animation style of this game. I think all of the monster character designs are great. They look like they fit the world. They look like they're the creature design of the monsters. And then each of those monsters' respective combat that you're interacting with when they're attacking you and you're dodging lines up really well. It does a really good job of mirroring that. And that's, I think, very intentional design. For example, when you're fighting one of the dogs, the things you have to dodge are bones, or something like that. It's nice synergy there to where even though the combat is not in any way you versus the visual of that monster. It doesn't feel like there's this big disconnect that now you're playing a mini game for combat versus you're actually engaging in combat with this character. And I think that's very hard to do, and that should be commended. I think that the characters, when they're talking to you, I really like how when Flowey is talking to you and you now find out he's evil Flowey, his face that's animating the text box is kind of the evil looking Flowey, and the flower sprite in the game in the overworld is still the exact same as it was before. And so moments like that where the sprite may not change on the screen, but their face, while it's moving and animated, is expressing and emoting in a way that reflects the context of whatever dialogue you're having. I think that's really nice. It's a nice, it's just a nice part of the storytelling visually, without having to without you as the player having to look at a sprite that's just a few pixels high and trying to find the emotion or the context of what they're saying. I like that in kind of going back to combat for just a second, the way that like Nabstablook, there's moments where, I'll use Nabstablook as an example, when he's crying, his tears fall from his little body that's above the combat box and fall down into the combat box. And so I like that there's moments where your combat is sometimes isolated to that little square where your little heart is, and sometimes there's actually a connection between the combat box and the character.
Can I make a note on that?
Mm-hmm.
Another example of that is when you come across the dummy in like the sewer or whatever, and it's like an angry dummy, and you're fighting an angry dummy, and he's like throwing cotton at you, and you have to like lure the cotton back up out of the box so that it hits the dummy that's flailing above the combat box, which is a clever thing that isn't really used in any other battles in the game.
Yeah, so there's moments of that where, like, we kind of talked about in mechanics how the combat can be a little redundant, but then visually, there's a lot of really good moments where the combat is engaging, just on a visual level. There are a couple things, you already touched on the soundtrack, and I agree, so I'm not going to go too much in depth there, but the music is really, really good in this game. The soundtrack is so long. I was just looking at it earlier. There are over 100 tracks on the soundtrack.
So a few years back, or it was probably four or 5 years back at this point, they had done like the Undertale symphony thing that like Toby Fox himself had like put together and like, you know, whatever. And they live streamed it one night on YouTube. And I was listening to it. It's like 3 hours. And I listened to the whole thing. And I got like choked up at different points because like the association with the music is so strong with certain parts of the story now that it's just, and that's what you want your music to do, is to like solidify moments in a like a storytelling perspective. So yeah, just the music is just so fantastic.
Yeah. And it would be really easy for the soundtrack of an 8-bit style game to be just this corny, chiptune, generic sounding music, but it really does add to the storytelling of the game. I do agree a lot of your points about the main character design. I wish you could kind of customize it when you started the game. I feel like as intricate as this game is with the way that it changes based on your decision, I don't think that would be overly complex to integrate into this game, and I'd like to have seen that. So that was one negative.
Another choice they could have done was make like clothing available to buy, and you could like change your outfit.
Yeah, because like you can put a tutu on in the game, but then your character's never actually wearing one in the overworld,
right?
And that would have been kind of nice to be able to customize it. There are a lot of parts visually in this game that I feel like tease you with what could have been a step above the generic 8-bit style game. Like you mentioned, when you're walking across the castles in the distance and you're this silhouette. And like that is one moment. And another moment is when you're in Waterfall and you're walking and you can see your reflection in the puddles. Things like that are very few and far between in this game. And I feel like it kind of teases what could have been a very visually stunning game still in that 8-bit style. And a lot of this game is still that very typical 8-bit style game, which again, I'm not going to knock it because it's a lot of work to do all of that, but it would have been nice to see a game that has such a deep story to have visuals that are very unique as well. But I didn't take any points off for that. One of the biggest reasons that I didn't give this full points, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but the final boss battle with Flowey, I hate it. I absolutely hate it visually. I think it is so jarring, and I think that that's supposed to be the point, but it's like, here we have this 8-bit style game, this 2D pixel animated style game, and you just went from a battle with Asgore, which looked very menacing and very dark, and when he takes his like trident and he breaks the mercy, option for you to pick, visually very striking, very engaging. It's really, really strong, and it feels like, oh my gosh, this is the final boss battle of the game. And then it's like, no, actually the final boss battle of the game is Flowey. And I'm sorry, but it looks stupid. Like, visually, it just looks stupid.
It would have given me nightmares as a child if
right.
I'd seen that.
And that's what it feels like. It feels like, okay, you're trying to scare me like I'm 6 years old. You're not. You had this visually great game, and now we have this weird, clunky looking 3D animated, nothing is anatomically correct monster with thorns and vines and human teeth and weird shaped eyeballs. And it's just, to me, I think I understand that like the point of it is that it's supposed to be completely otherworldly and not fit the world of Undertale, but I think that's a detriment to the game because I think the whole point is that Flowey is an in-game enemy, and then we find out that he's Azrael at the end, and Azrael looks like he fits the world. It's not like Flowey, Flowey was the form he took when he didn't have his real form. So I don't think the argument is, well, no, it's part of the story. It's that he doesn't fit the world and that he's not of Undertale. He's not the same as Undertale. He's corrupted into this other thing. It's like, okay, but if this is really a world that you've tried to pull me into for the past 5.5 hours, like, the main villain should fit this world. You've drawn me in and engaged me with these characters, and my choices really mattered and had a difference, and now you're going to try and scare a 5-year-old with this creature design. I just think I hate it. I really do hate it. It's not my decision. It wasn't my decision to make, so I can't critique Toby Fox. He got to make whatever decision he wanted to make, but I just think for the purpose of the story, it's visually just awful, and I am sure everybody is going to come back at me and say,
no, you might have some people agree with you. I don't necessarily disagree. I guess it's just something I never really thought of in that way.
I just think that especially going from the final battle with Asgore, which looks almost cinematic, how good, like that final battle aesthetically and visually, like Asgore is a fantastic final boss battle. Just visually, it looks great. Mm-hmm. And then we switch gears. It's almost like I just got whiplash switching from that to Flowey. And I don't think it's good. I would almost rather seen Flowey as the villain, but he visually looks a little more realistic in that 8-bit style, the way that the castle looked more visually striking, or the reflection in the puddles were present. You could have made it more realistic looking without it looking like a clunky 3D
menace
that it really just looks like a mess. It looks like somebody cut pictures out of a magazine and glued it together, and that's your villain. Like, why am I scared of this? This is
a weird ransom note.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. I hate it. I hate it. And I think it pulls you out of the world, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with that aspect that Flowey's supposed to be like super meta, and he's like corrupted your save file and you can't quit the game, and like, you didn't have to do that. You had a great story and a great final boss, and Flowey even was a great final boss, story-wise, but visually, it just kind of ruins it. It's like I just, switched to a different game, and I don't like it. So, and visually, I don't like it either. I think it looks horrible. But I felt like taking half a point off for that wasn't too terribly harsh. So that's why I gave it 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay. I mean, I took half a point off for things that were much smaller than that.
Yeah.
So, okay, the next category is personal taste and preference. So, out of 2 points, this is always the hardest one, I think, for us, is either this or creativity always seems to be the hardest category for us. For me, it always feels like I always feel like a little pathetic, but I gave it 2 out of 2 points because I do love this game.
You shouldn't feel pathetic.
I just feel like I give so many points in this section to things, even when, like, I don't know. I just feel like I just love everything too much. And so I feel like I have no, like, I just love everything. So I always give it all these points. But anyway, 2 out of 2 points for Undertale. This was a game that I went into with 0 expectations, and I left feeling like I had a new, like, game to put away in my favorites. This is a game that I think about often. This is a game that I recommend all the time. This is a game that I watch playthroughs of often. This game impressed me in so many ways. It has so many moments that I can consider memorable. It delivered a challenge to me as a gamer. There are characters that I think about all the time. I constantly reference, "Hoi, I'm Temmie," like every day of my life. Like, this was just a game that I never expected to have an impact on me the way it did. And then it did, and I was like, oh, I just really want to, like, consume everything in regards to this series as I can. So, you know, I read a bunch of, like, I read, like, the Undertale wiki, and I went on the Undertale Reddit and looked around for a little bit, like, right after I played it, and I watched other people's playthroughs of it just to see, like, how they played and different styles, and listened to the music all the time. And I mean, I don't know what else I can really say other than this game is so uniquely packaged in a way that still feels cozy and familiar. It's a strange thing to describe because I feel like it doesn't make sense when I say it that way. But it feels like a game that I grew up with, even though it was a game I didn't play until I was like 26. So in that way, it feels like this strange sort of juxtaposition in a really satisfying way, so that I look back on this game with so much fondness, despite all of the, you know, mechanical challenges or difficulties or frustrations I may have had. When I look back on this game, all of the positives in my perspective outweigh all of that for me. So I always look back on this game with fun and with fondness, and yes, people should play this, and oh, it was so fun, and the story is so great, and the characters are so, you know, comical, and the dialogue is just, you know, sticks in your head forever. And don't even get me started on the music. I have the whole soundtrack in my work playlist, so it plays at work all the time. This just overall, I just think this is a game that I don't regret in any aspect playing. So because of that, I gave it full 2 out of 2 points.
I'm not surprised. Thought you were going to give it 2 out of 2.
That's why I always feel bad, because I feel like I'm easy to predict.
Well, there are lots of prior episodes where you did not give 2 out of 2.
That's true.
So, that was one reason I picked this to review, is because I know how much Tori likes it. So I know it'd be really easy for her to re-watch it and replay it and stuff. I actually give this 1 out of 2 points. I think that this game, for me, doesn't have as many fond memories as Tori, is because I played it completely blind and knew nothing about the game. And so all of the beautiful parts of the story I didn't get to experience because I had no idea what I was doing. And so part of it is because of nostalgia that I don't have from my very first playthrough. And I think another part of it is also the fact that to really fully experience that, I would have to replay the entire game. I'd have to wipe my save file and replay the entire game. And I just don't want to devote 6 hours into doing that because it'd probably take me a little more than 6 hours. I think that in general, this game is really great if you know the catch that nobody is supposed to die in this game. Like there is another way. You don't have to kill anybody in this game, and you shouldn't. It's more than you don't have to. It's that you shouldn't, because if you do, you won't be able to fully experience the game. And unfortunately, if you don't know that, or if you find out halfway through, it completely changes your experience of the game. And to me, it's just a little bit too long to replay just to get to a specific ending. And for me, it kind of loses its appeal unless you set out to experience each run for what that run is. And once you kind of know the ending, for me personally, I think it's not really worth replaying. So I was very fortunate and able to watch Tori play this blind for the first time and see her reactions to it. And she did the full pacifist run. So like pretty much got to see and experience everything in the story. That's, great. But I wouldn't necessarily feel the need to experience that for myself because I got to experience that with Tori. And I think this game is extremely experiential, and that's the point of the game. And so I think that's a good thing. But because it's my personal taste and preference, I just personally wouldn't play it again just to experience something that I watched Tori experience. And so for that, because I'll probably not ever really play the game again, but I did enjoy it, and I do think it's a good game, and I enjoyed watching Tori play it, I gave it half credit. So 1 out of 2 for me, which is not bad. Like I don't dislike the game at all, but it's not a game that I'm going to pick up and play through start to finish because of those kind of aspects we already touched on, and how it can be kind of tedious and can be kind of long, and it can be a little boring at parts. But I think the good parts are really good, and the bad parts are not really that fun. And so for me, 1 out of 2.
Okay. So the final category is creativity. So for video games, we actually give this an allotment of 2 points instead of 1 like other categories have. So for creativity, I gave it 1.5 points out of 2. This game really did become iconic. I think that was even before its launch. Didn't you read earlier that the Kickstarter campaign had a goal of 5,000 and ended up with 51,000? Just that alone kind of helps you to see that people anticipated this game, and I feel like this game did not let down that anticipation. And when I considered streaming this game, it was 4 years after its release, and we still had a concern that people were going to come in and spoil the game for me. So the first couple sessions, the first couple streams that I did, Holland and I agreed that I was not to look at the chat because I did not want to be spoiled, and because I knew the kind of cult following fan base that Undertale had at this point, that even accidentally I was afraid of people coming in, fans of the game, and giving me information that I did not want. So those first couple streams, when I was so afraid of that, I didn't look at the chat at all. Holland read the chat to me. I think that needs to be noted, because I think even today, people look back at Undertale and it was just kind of like a peak mid-2010s staple of a game for a lot of people. And I think, from 2015 till probably 2020, I would say was its probably peak there. Everybody was playing Undertale. I felt like I was the odd man out for not having played Undertale by 2019. Toby Fox obviously put a lot of effort into this, and knowing that the whole game was basically him and like 2 other people that helped him out occasionally is impressive to look at the game that was created just from his mind and put together by him, and the music done by him. Just all of that like creativity genuinely boiled down into this one 6 to 8 hour game is really impressive to me. And I find that because the game is so memorable in so many different aspects and so iconic in gaming circles around the world, I just find it impossible for me to give it more than or less than the 1.5 points that I gave it. The only reason I didn't give it full 2 out of 2 points is because a lot of it was inspired by the Mother series. So there are certain aspects that, and I'm not denying the creativity of Toby Fox in Undertale at all, but knowing that he had sort of a baseline of at least visual structure by Earthbound is the only reason that I didn't give it full points. Now, I think that could you argue that it should have 2 points? Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't disagree with you. But just in my own perspective, I wanted to make sure that, I was fair also to the creators of Earthbound, knowing that their creativity had inspired this new creativity. So that being said, because of the milestone and how iconic Undertale was, and just the fact that it was basically a one-man team, with the exception of a few other people, was definitely why I wanted to give it 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay. I give it 2 points out of 2. I don't think that it merits less than like a half point less because it was inspired by Earthbound. I think there's a lot of work that's inspired by previous work that still merits its own creativity. So I don't agree, but I don't think you're necessarily wrong. But yeah, I think that the game was just really new and unpredictable. I mean, the 8-bit style had fallen out of style completely until Undertale came back, and kind of revitalized that kind of nostalgia of the 8-bit style video games. I think that it's had pretty big pop culture impact, that especially among video game fans, but I think the fact that just it has multiple storylines, it has different storylines, the game changes based on how you play it. It does give you a lot of really good hints so that you can play a pacifist run. You kind of know that a little bit from the beginning. It's not super, super clear like we kind of talked about. The end game bonus, the end credits change based on how the game ends. There's a post credits that change based on your choices. So even all the way up till the very, very end of the game, your choices have an impact on what you get to experience as a character. I think that, it was very new and unpredictable. I didn't read this at the beginning. I forgot to, so I looked it up. But in 2019, Polygon named the game among the decade's best. In 2021, IGN listed Undertale as the 20th greatest game of all time. In Japan, a nationwide poll of over 50,000 players listed Undertale as the 13th greatest game of all time.
Wow.
So those are incredible accolades for a game made by like 3 people. I mean, Toby Fox to crowdfund and develop this game pretty much on his own. I mean, not, he wasn't one guy in his basement necessarily,
right,
but I mean, it's one man's idea and creation.
This wasn't a team of 50 people.
It was self-published. It was self-released. This wasn't made by some big game studio. Earthbound was. It was made by a really big team of people that all worked together collaboratively. And this game was made by just one guy and, a very, very small group of people. But I just think that it's become extremely iconic. And I think that a game like Undertale, just because it's so unique and so different, and surprisingly, the internet culture surrounding Undertale has been, I think there's some, horrible parts of any fandom, but at least from our experience in streaming it, I was surprised at how many people didn't come into the chat and spoil things.
Yeah. I mean, we had lots of people come in that we'd never met before, but everybody was super cool and super chill.
Yeah. And so the way that people just allowed us, over 5 years after the game was released, allowed us to just enjoy and experience the game for what it was, I think that's pretty admirable. That the community surrounding Undertale, they get it. Like, they understand, like, Toby Fox's, child that was to create this game and have it be the experience of the person playing it. And I think internet culture has helped this game in the sense that, like, if you really want to do a pacifist run, you have to be very, very careful about what choices you make in the game. And, the internet's been very helpful in that you can look up those resources if you want to, or you can just play completely blind and you don't have to. But yeah, overall, I think that it's extremely creative, and I gave it 2 points out of 2 for creativity.
Okay.
So, what was your final score?
May I have your pen? Because I think you just changed my mind.
Ha ha ha.
Okay, so I'm changing my score to 2 out of 2 for creativity.
Ha ha ha. Yeah.
Thanks, Papyrus. Okay, so my final score is 8.5 out of 10.
All right, my final score is 7 out of 10.
Okay, that's fair.
Alrighty. Any final thoughts?
No, I think we covered most everything.
Okay. Are you ready for some lightning round questions?
Yes.
Okay. Who is your favorite character?
Oh, maybe I wasn't ready.
You weren't ready.
I think I have to pick Napstablook. I love him. When you go to hang out with him at his house and he just wants to lay on the floor with you and feel like trash, and then you don't move for like 5 minutes and then it like turns into like the universe. I just love that. And then he's like just so happy that you just did that for him, and it's so nice. I just really like Napstablook, so I think I'm gonna go with him for my favorite.
Cool. I think my favorite is probably Papyrus, which I think he's like a fan favorite, so I guess I'm basic. But
no, it's okay. Papyrus is great.
He's pretty great.
Yeah.
I think one reason I like him so much is that when Tori and I played it, I read all the dialogue for Papyrus, so that was fun.
It's because you did the voice the best.
I tried, yeah. So, what's your least favorite monster or combat?
Do we want to talk about are we doing like bosses?
Yeah, you can say bosses, or if it's, if it's not a boss, it doesn't have to be.
I mean, like, I guess we both talked about it, but like, I hate mechanically the Flowey fight at the end.
Yeah.
So I would say the Flowey fight is my least favorite because it's so chaotic. Like, there's just no rhyme or reason.
Yeah. Mine would be Miss Muffet.
Okay, yeah.
Mine would definitely be Miss Muffet.
That one's pretty terrible.
Because I ate the spider donut and had to complete that.
Gosh, I bet that was awful.
I think Graham was here, and I made him beat it for me because I was like, I give up. I'm about to quit this game. Like, I can't do it. So, Miss Muffet, definitely least favorite.
That's fair.
Favorite score, which you
As
do
in,
not
like,
have
song,
to
right?
name. You don't have to name a track. You can just name like an area or a battle or something because there are over 101 tracks. So,
I did list 4 earlier, so I'll just kind of repeat those. But like, I think my favorites are probably the hotel theme, Snowden Town, Megalovania, and then the Napstablook battle are probably my top like 4. But genuinely, the entire soundtrack is fantastic.
Yeah. I don't know if I have one. The one that always gets stuck in my head is the song that plays in the shop with the turtle guy.
Oh, yeah.
That one's always stuck in my head.
The shop theme.
Yeah. So that's the one I always am thinking about. But
Papyrus's bone trestle theme is really fun too.
Yeah, I do like that.
I could just name all of them and they would be my
I was gonna
favorite.
say, or when you're fighting Papyrus. I like that a lot too. If you were going to play again, which run would you do?
I would probably try for a genocide run, even though it would be very hard for me. Yeah. But since it would be the opposite of what I've experienced before, I think it would be the most interesting is to just go full genocide. I know there's like a neutral run too, where you like kill some and spare some, which is probably what you did your first time through. Yeah. But yeah, I'd probably do full genocide if I was going to do that.
Yeah. I would probably do a pacifist run just because I didn't get to do that on my own playthrough. I did watch you do it, but so that's probably why I may not replay it because it's very long. If you're going to make any design changes to the game, what would you change?
The only thing I can think is that I wish that there was an item box at every save point.
That would be really helpful.
Yeah. So, because I think if I remember right, I just rewatched it, so I should remember right. But toward the end of the game, I have to go back for the spider donut because I don't have it in my inventory. And I have to trek back, like, all the way back to, like, Temmie Village or something to find an item box to get it out. So I think if I were to change anything design-wise, it would be that they're at the save point, you would just have an item box no matter what.
Yeah. I would probably change the final boss, Flowey's final boss.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do. Would you change the ending of the pacifist run specifically?
No, I think it's good. And I think once you beat it and then you can reload your game and continue to play into the true pacifist ending, I think all of that's really, really fun. So
I don't think you have to reload your game to play the true pacifist ending. The only reason you had to do that was because you didn't complete some of the other quests to get the stuff triggered.
So then, I guess then just to continue playing, I just think it... So yeah, I don't... As far as the pacifist ending goes, which is the only one I know, I thought it all resolved and wrapped up really nicely in a very heartfelt, kind of poignant way that didn't feel like forced or anything. So I liked it. So I don't think I would change anything.
I would change 2 things.
Okay.
One, I would change that Azrael is stuck, stayed behind. I would change that. I would find some way to redeem him at the end.
Okay.
The other thing I would change is I would want, and maybe this exists and I just don't know, but I want there to be an ending or like a post-credit scene or something where you get to take that snowman piece and you get to put it in the snow somewhere.
Oh, I forgot about the snowman piece. Yeah, that never gets resolved, does it?
No. I mean, not that I'm aware of. If there is, please feel free to let us know on our socials or our website. But
please.
Yeah, that's what I would change. I want there to be an ending with that little snowman piece because I think that's the cutest.
It is very cute when he's like, "Take me with you.
Just take a piece of me. I've always wanted to see the world." Like somehow you like put him in the snow or put him up on a mountain or something. That's what I would do.
That would be cute.
Yeah. Alrighty, and then last question: what would you pitch for a sequel?
Ooh, a sequel. I'm not entirely sure, but it would be super fun if your player characters were Sans and Papyrus, and perhaps you have to switch between the two depending on like a puzzle you had to solve or like a conversation you had to have because they have like different strengths and stuff. You could switch like who was in battle. That sort of thing. Kind of how like in Deltarune, how they have like your whole party like battles together and they have like different skills and stuff. It'd be cool if you could do that as Papyrus and Sans and then have different dynamics based on the two of them. So I don't know. As far as story goes, I'm not really sure, but I think they would be like fun characters to like see the story through the eyes of.
I think we should go in true fashion of the 1990s sequel games, and we should have a go-kart racing game with Sans, Papyrus, and Undyne, and you can pick all the characters, and it's like a pixelated go-kart racing game where the controls are a little wonky and you have to like veer around people, but then you're always running into the road, one of those. I think we should just go in true classic retro fashion.
That sounds so fun.
And make either like a...
Can I be Temmie?
Yeah. You can either like a go-kart racing game or like a cooking game where you're cooking together.
If you play as Toriel, you get like butterscotch pie that you throw out the back and people slip on.
Mm-hmm. Like a Mario Kart.
Yeah.
But it's Undertale characters and it's all pixel. That's
fun.
what I would want for a sequel.
I'd be down for that.
Make it happen. Alrighty, well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time. We sure did. But if you didn't, feel free to tell us why. If you did, you can also tell us that you liked it by leaving us a review on the podcast platform. Whatever you're listening to us, just leave us a review. Links to our show notes, Patreon, socials, and a suggestion box are all on our website at lionandmousepodcast.com. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.